It's being reported that the man recently arrested after a woman's parachute failed to open during a skydive is her husband.
A case that gripped the nation.
Why did he want to kill her?
About a woman who was supposed to die.
She fell around 4,000 feet.
How she survived that is miraculous.
Told uniquely by those who lived it.
Emil was very much a narcissistic psychopath. Anything that got in his way, he got rid of them.
And the survivor herself, Victoria Cilliers, as she gives her first in-depth interview.
You're not sure how much is actually the truth. I couldn't compute why my husband would try and kill me.
The Fall, Skydive Murder Plot on Channel 4, starts Tuesday at 9.
Guy, Adam, it is so nice. Thank you so much for making the time. I'm not really sure where to start. We've thrown this together because it's fitting it around your busy schedules, and I am so incredibly grateful. I came out of class today, and everyone's really excited about sort of getting to meet you. Guy, people are going to know you from, I think a lot of people will know you from our Falklands War frontline story, differently, the Derry City story as well. Adam, Feeder Pitch, Rise of the Premier League. A lot of our students will know you from that. Valley Cops, and my favourite with Secret Life of Students, which you did for Channel 4. I hope we can get to talking about those briefly, but we're here to talk about The Fall today. So Guy, what excited you about The Fall? Tell us about what drew you in, and what your role was as well.
So my name's Guy King, and I was the director on the series The Fall. I got a phone call, which I always feel lucky when the phone rings, but it was Story Films. I'd done bits and pieces for them previously, but never a full-on project. And Kira Godfrey, one of the sort of the top people in the company at the time, she was telling me about a project that they had coming up. And I hadn't previously worked on a true crime documentary as such, and I suppose as a filmmaker, you're always aware of everything happening around you, and you think, oh, I wonder if I'll do a true crime documentary one day. And initially, I suppose, as a filmmaker, you're slightly cautious about a genre that is very popular at the time and is happening everywhere, and you think, well, what on earth can I bring? Because previously my films would be a bit more, a bit more touchy-feely, a bit more sort of social. I mean, the closest I got to true crime was down at the Maudsley Hospital. We were working with forensic patients who were being released essentially from Broadmoor on the slipstream down to re-entering society. And often, but obviously the demands of a true crime documentary are very different, because you're very much digging up the crime. And you're representing it, and that always brings with it those questions of re-traumatizing people. So I think once you get a phone call, I got a phone call about a true crime documentary. I thought, well, what on earth can I bring? And Kira quite quickly laid down the story, as I think the best sort of pitches are often when someone just leads with the story. And once she told me that the woman had survived the parachute attack and had gone on in court case, I'm not spoiling this for anyone, I hope, but went on in court to defend her husband, essentially. And you just felt yourself gasping at every story twist. And but then I thought, well, I still don't know what I can bring. And Kira said, well, Channel 4 wanted to be really unusual and to have some sort of drama layer, and whether that will appeal to you or not. So for me, it was the combination of an incredible story, a sort of a promise of it being formally unusual, and then obviously having a great lot of respect and love for Story Films. So I woke up on the Monday morning and I emailed Kira and I said, yes, please consider me for this. And I'll go on, but I'll let you interject.
No, I want to ask Adam where he comes in this, because Adam, what's your role? I mean, were you before Guy or were you after Guy?
So yeah, my name's Adam Hopkins. So I'm an exec producer at Story Films, which means that sort of part, like I'm sort of part of the furniture at the company, and we'll be working on whatever factual projects we have in. And so that what that really means is that during production I'll be quite intensely on 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 projects, and then the development team are ahead of me. So Kira or the others that might be working on that development will be ahead of me and looking at loads of things, most of which won't happen. And then they'll be talking to a lot of directors. And in this case, Guy was this sort of director that Kira and the rest of us were really keen to work with. And actually, unusually, we were able to sort of say to the channel at the time of pitching it that Guy was really interested in doing it and he would be sort of attached to the project. And that happens in sort of feature docs or big films and things like that. But for a TV program, that doesn't always happen. It's quite often that the production company will pitch a project and then that gets commissioned and then we sort of hire everyone for it. Part of the sell actually to Channel 4 was that we would do it with Guy, partly because of Guy's previous experience, but also because Guy was sort of like intimating to us as we've been talking to him that he was kind of keen to do some drama work and move towards drama, and we wanted someone not necessarily that had done loads of that but sort of had the ambition to do those things. So I come into it, to be honest, on a project like this later than that. I come in at the start of like, okay, we are going to make it, this is the shape of it, i.e. it's 3 parts for Channel 4, now we need to put a team together and actually do it. And so we then go from when you pitch these things to a channel, you have to put in quite a lot of detail. So a load of research is done in the first instance before it's a commission, where that will include sort of knowing quite a lot of what happens in the story, what people might say about their part in the story, who we believe we can get to be on camera. Some of those people will agree in advance, and some of it will be, okay, we're going to have to just take a punt that if we do make this program, we believe that these people might also sort of take part. So then you sort of reimagine it once you get into production, and Guy and I then work together quite closely through the production of kind of going, okay, we've got a rough framework, but how do we actually do this and what do we want to change? And I heard someone say, like, I should attribute this to Alma Harrell, that I heard say this at a talk once, which I just love the idea of, you make a film 3 times, and once is the pitch, once is the shoot, and then the third time is the edit. And so actually each time you sort of start again, but you've got something which is guiding you and kind of keeping you like within some like on the tracks. So when Guy and I started, we're sort of at stage 2 of like, okay, we've actually got to make this now through filming, and then there'll be the third stage, which is the edit.
I think that's really valuable, Adam, because I didn't know any of that, and I'm sure there's lots of people that are listening in the room right now that didn't know any of that as well. So this has got to be really unusual. And I'm picking up on something you said about the danger of doing a true crime story, is that you sometimes re-traumatize people, Guy. And so there are storytelling devices at play in this that are sort of really unusual. I mean, for me anyway, I was completely drawn in to how would you, who came up with the ideas around how you constructed the story, how you told the story with the actual characters, with the actors, putting between the two. Where was that born?
I mean, I think fundamentally, there's an interesting dynamic on every documentary that I've experienced, whereby you get into the office, it's finally been commissioned, and you're like, okay, we know what was pitched. What's the reality of who we can find to take part? And what will our sort of visual approach be? And working closely with the producers, you sort of work out what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are and how you can complement each other. And I think the relationship between the director and the producer is a fantastic one, because in a way, when it's at its most fertile, it's a really symbiotic, relationship. So maybe on certain days I'm not being decisive, and Adam helps with the decisiveness. Maybe there's not enough ideas coming in, and we'll consult with other friends and people in the industry and have lunch with people. And often you're telling someone what you're making, and they're like, "Oh, have you seen this Polish documentary where there's a man tries to kill his wife? Oh, you got to watch that." And there's a really fertile period where, for weeks and maybe even months, you're really just working out what on earth can this be. And our executive producer Pete Beard handed over a reference at one point, which was The Landscapers. And that's a drama starring Olivia Colman. It's a true crime drama series, and they use a lot of techniques which we essentially stole, you know, and I know very good filmmakers who say there's no point in trying to borrow an idea or interpret an idea. If the idea is good, just steal it. You know, that's what we do as creative people. We also took a lot of reference from Jean Benet, casting Jean Benet, which is a Netflix documentary, and there was a number of other references, but those were perhaps two of the key ones. And we were looking at that, looking at those, and the way that they broke the fourth wall and showed our hand. And I have a real buzz for an approach that feels authentic and real and true, and sort of has a therapeutic benefit to it, you know, so that the people taking part, I always say to them, listen, I want you to be proud of this documentary in 10 years, you know, and I want you to be as proud of the documentary as I am. You know, we are in this together. So that I felt from the get-go that to show the fourth wall and to show that how we were making the drama would help the audience understand why we were making the drama. And we were making the drama from a perspective of wanting to empathize with the victim. And obviously the fact that she had survived was a huge benefit for all of us, including her, that she could help us understand what had happened to her and why with 5 or 10 years perspective. And hopefully, you know, and my sort of desire and prayers from the start is that the process that she goes on with us would be healthy and positive for her. And I'm delighted to report that it was, and, you know, that she really found the process difficult, but extremely positive, and the relationships that she built through making it. But also, I knew that Victoria, because she'd given television interviews previously in different environments, and she'd just written a book about her experience called I Survived, I knew that she wasn't averse to telling her story. I mean, I think that was a huge thing. You know, it's not like you're knocking on someone's door at the end of a dark lane where they've made themselves a recluse for 20 years. You know, Victoria was telling her story publicly, and so it was just about making sure that what we were doing was in keeping with something she wanted to do. And you know, I can tell you about our first meeting at some point, but it was the sort of, you know, first meeting that you never forget, because, you know, it's important, a part of the process, that the first time you meet the person who you've been reading about for months. But I can tell you about that later, or no, if you want.
I should just say something that on like when you do something which is slightly experimental, and you know, there's a lot of different broadcasters out there, and we work for the American broadcasters and the UK broadcasters, and sort of make different programs for all of them, and love working for the different places, and they have different remits, right? But one of the things that Channel 4 do want to do is be bold in their storytelling. And so by being bold in storytelling and doing something experimental like this, I think it's fair to say that some of the things we set out to do worked really well, and we discovered things, but some things didn't work, and some things just happened by accident. And I think that, like, one of the things that I didn't really predict is that actually by being able to have because we had so much sort of verbatim material and being able to dramatize such a lot of the story, we could do quite a lot of the storytelling which gets all the facts out there and takes the weight off the shoulders of a contributor like Victoria for having to report the facts, because she was really nervous about not really remembering what happened in the order of it, or like getting it kind of properly right. She's been through a couple of court cases, you know, like her mind was messed with by her partner for quite a long time, so it's quite hazy. And therefore Guy was able to kind of say to her and be with her in a way, like in the interviews, in such a way that he could kind of be able to say, tell me your emotional story and essentially how you felt, and go through it that way and explore all of that without having to say, okay, what happens next and what happened on this occasion and all of that. I think that, like, that just through that, I didn't really predict that would happen quite like that, but we took a lot of weight off her storytelling so that she could just basically open up rather than having to do the nuts and bolts of the story.
No, that's amazing, Adam. Yeah, and I'm just hearing sort of a huge amount of trust you must have to build up with the subject. I mean, as a documentary photographer, I get that, but I spend moments with people. But how are you kind of known that was going to work, right? I mean, what was it? What were the actual mechanics of the storytelling like? What was it like when it was actually happening for the first times? Did you see how she was reacting? And for me, it would be an amazing just to walk on set. I mean, that would be amazing. But to be walking on set and acting, even if you were as myself, I'd be terrified, right? But I mean, what was that? What were those moments like? Did you know it was working, or did you, the things you did to sort of ease it along or pull it back?
I think. I mean, Guy, you can probably talk to this better than me, but I think we were like, sometimes on projects, right? Things just line up and things come together in a really healthy way, and like, we're often, there's loads of things, there's loads of elements to each project, right? And a lot of the time, like 8 out of 10 of those elements will be working really well. I think what happened on this one is almost all of the elements worked really well, and one of those elements was that the real police, the two main police contributors, were both really into the idea of exploring truth through, like, doing this reconstruction and being able to sort of distill down what was said in these things, and they basically loved being on set. That it was a new experience to them, and so firstly they just enjoyed the experience, and they sort of, for part of it, I think the bit that didn't work for us was we filmed their experience of it, and the thing that doesn't work, and we so therefore didn't put it in, is kind of they're reacting to the process. They're reacting to, like, whoa, this is really cool. At, like, oh, you've taken my interview and I've got it down from 6 hours to 5 minutes, and how have you distilled that and all of that? But the viewer's not interested in that, right? That's just a given that we're able to do that. But what did work is then when they're reacting to sort of the emotion from those scenes, or they're reacting to each other, or sort of they do a bit of eye contact, or there's a really good bit, I think, where we say, oh, Emile makes Maddie's skin crawl. She says that in the real interview that Guy does. And then there's a bit with her watching on and she kind of goes like that. And, you know, like, who knows whether that is exactly that moment. But once that's all cut together in that sequence, and Maddie was there, sort of, like, you know, we were very collaborative with them. We sort of told them how the filming was going to go. The Guy spent ages with them in the interview chair. We showed them all the edits, you know, like, we spent, like, quite a lot of time bringing them in on the process. And that is highly unusual for, like, a police contributors who might be much more mistrusting of program makers. They just put their trust in us, and especially in Guy, from sort of sitting there and confiding in him, from talking for, like, quite long interviews, weren't they, Guy? I mean, like, basically, people might not know, but, like, the interviews for that are days long. It's not hours long. It's like several days, those interviews, and like, and Guy and I come from different places on that, right? So my experience is not to interview people for really long. So I would say to Guy, okay, when you go out, just make this one like 2 hours, Guy. And then I'd hear back at like 10 p.m. that they've just wrapped, you know. But Guy, what Guy gets from interviews is, like, incredible emotional depth, and so that meant that we're, like, as I said earlier, where we're able to kind of, we can do all the facts, right? We know that, we can check them, we can kind of find ways of putting that in the program. But the emotional depth that Guy gets from the interviews, and then the sort of the collaboration with those police officers who are actually enjoying this whole unusual process, but we're getting something different from it. It made it, like, as I say, each of those elements just lined up in a way that there was no weak link for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's not giving away too many trade secrets to say that when I speak to people for long periods of time, I'll often know previously, whether from reading their book or from having heard, you know, on the grapevine, for example, that Maddie had told a podcast in passing that the police officer, that her own personal relationship had quite severe difficulties that allowed her to relate to Victoria's story. And I made a decision that I absolutely wouldn't ask Maddie about that until she volunteered to talk about it. And that's partly out of respect, but it's also, I guess, a filmmaking sort of decision that this will be much more powerful and much more authentic if I wait until Maddie brings it up herself. So there is an element of sort of the thing I noticed. I mean, this is a broader point, but before I got into television, I got into television when I was 30, but before I did, I always had an assumption that it would be a really cynical sort of world, where people were, taking chances with people's emotions, or, they were playing silly buggers and being manipulative. And I'd just been really heartened to sort of find that, at least in my part of the industry, there's a great overlap between treating people with respect and sort of, admiration and love, also leads to really good telly, So for me, that was a wonderful discovery. And in these interviews, it held true. Like when I was interviewing Victoria, the victim, in the story, as Adam says, we'd read all the court reports, and we'd read a lot of verbatim transcripts of police interviews that had been used in court. So we knew a lot of the story, and I could tell as I talked to Victoria, there were certain areas that she didn't remember. There were certain areas she didn't want to remember, and there were certain areas that would be problematic for her to talk about too much, in order to protect her relationship with family members or whatever. So as an interviewer, I think the best thing to do in that is just to sort of weave your way through and decide, and just instinctively decide, is now a good time to sort of, really interrogate this with someone, and will they appreciate it? And ultimately that's it, is having an understanding in yourself that will this interviewee appreciate it if I really dig deep now and I put them on the spot, because people don't mind being put on the spot if it's an interesting conversation, where you're saying, well, do you really remember that? Or do you not remember that because you're traumatized? And you're essentially politely saying, can we talk about this a bit more? Can we unpick this a bit more? Because we all know how hard it is to talk about the past, So, but Adam said it really well there, that because of the raw product that we had, i.e. all the police interviews, etc., it put us on a really strong foundation. We could resort to the drama to tell some scenes, and to the interviews to do others. And our guiding principle was always, let's not just use the drama to paint pretty pictures. Let's use it to develop the story. So to answer your question, Jonathan, like in advance, we had a fair inkling that it would work, because we had mapped out, this bit of the story will be done by drama. This bit of the story will be done in interview. Then we'll do a bit by drama. Then we'll do a bit. So we had a fairly comprehensive map of how the story would progress, and what the cliffhangers would be, at least on paper, and perhaps half of the plan sticks in the edit and half of it changes. But it was thanks in large part to all the police transcripts and the court interviews that we were able to make this work.
Yeah. This very much comprehensively answers my question, which I was sort of hurtling with at the beginning about this idea of re-traumatizing people. But so, what I've just heard is that the story got pitched to you, and it was all about, and Adam's pitch was included you. And so what you then take on is this enormous burden of responsibility that you are going to care for these people. And you've described a process that was part therapy, part acting, part whatever else.
Mm.
And you've taken them through it. You've turned them into actors at points, and then you've told their story. You very bravely, and it sounds terrified to have the subjects in on the edit. Are you all right with this? I know that sends shivers down the spines of anyone with a budget. But then you're going to get to the point now where it goes to air, right? And then you've got to find out, am I going to be able to look after them anymore? Because once they're out there, right, in front of the audience, they're not going to voice anymore, have they? As we know. So take us through that. What was that airing moment like, and what was the response?
So I should just say on when we, just to say about the edit thing, we wouldn't invite someone in early in the edit because our edit will be a process. And again, if people might not know how long these things take, but each episode would be something like 10 weeks or something, wouldn't it? Of essentially 2 people in an edit only doing that for sort of 40 or 50 hours a week for maybe 10 weeks. So you'd be looking at 400 or 500 hours of editing per episode. And that would be, we would get very far down the line before we then collaborate with the contributors, because what we're showing them is essentially this is what we believe is a good way to tell your story. And then of course there would be times where we need to take into consideration anything that they have an issue with, and we then would change things around if that's what needed to happen. In this case, actually, the guy and I went down to we went to a hotel in Devizes, didn't we, and hired a big a sort of function room and had a big telly and played them, and it all went very well, showing the contributors where we were at that point. There's a line in it where I kept forgetting each time that I was going and showing some of the contributors. There's a line in it where someone says, "You just don't know who the person sitting next to you on the sofa really is." And every time I would forget that there's lines coming up, and I would be sitting next to this contributor on the sofa. And so that each time I'd be thinking, oh God, I've got next time the armchair, next time. But actually, on this, there weren't really things that we changed around. The contributors very broadly were sort of on side, and we talked to them early, so we'd manage what they would expect from this. So as part of now duty of care of contributors, so as a company we have a duty of care to our contributors and to our teams, but to talk about the contributors, what that would involve now is we would pay for an independent psychologist team to talk to those contributors before filming and then before broadcast. And a lot of that is around them sort of purposely, they are independent, so they might say to us, this person is not in a fit sort of capacity to be able to take part in a program. That potentially could happen. Or they might say that we need to be very careful around a certain element of someone's story, and there's a risk in telling it, but these are the ways we could mitigate that risk. And then that support would be ongoing for that contributor, and particularly around when it comes to broadcast. A lot of what that is around for broadcast is sort of managing what's important to that particular contributor. Normally, a lot of people feel like they don't really care what strangers think, but they do care what the 20 people in their life think. And so sometimes that can extend to us showing those 20 people in their life before it's on TV, so that you take all the sort of pressure out of the viewing of when it's actually on TV. Or it might be, as is the case now, just to warn you that social media is a cesspit and people will say horrendous things regardless on what we put on TV. And so that might be just kind of increase your privacy settings, maybe take your photo off your social media for a few weeks, that kind of thing. So they would be guided through like that. What happens as well is there'll be a lot of publicity around a series. So sometimes they'll be approached for interviews, and some of the contributors will do interviews. In this case, Victoria didn't feel like she wanted to do that. She wanted to do the version she did with Guy, which is very sort of lengthy and supported. She didn't want to do the sort of soundbite version for publicity, but the police officers were sort of more willing to do that, because I think for them they was talking in a professional capacity, and so it's not so difficult for them to do. When the programme went out, there was, given that it is creative and boldly different, it had a very mixed reaction on social media. I think Guy and I both, particularly on Twitter, were looking at sort of quite a lot of negative comments about basically oh, who do these filmmakers think they are? They think it's so clever, etc., etc. More so, more criticism than I'd seen for a programme for quite a long time. And Guy and I sort of thought, well, we've made our sort of first properly Marmite series. We were very relieved when it had actually been very well watched and the viewing figures came through the next day. and it turned out to be a big hit for Channel 4. And the viewing figures, importantly, one of the things they measure on Channel 4 and probably all the channels is, say, if episode 1 gets a certain number, what percentage drop off before you get to episode 2 and 3, and the drop off was really small on this. So those things all in the end outweigh the sort of like negativity that just people shouting on social media essentially.
And we did get our 5-star review by the end of the week. You know, you just need one of those, and you're happy. And also, I think we did coincide with a period in Twitter's sort of development that's got pretty angry, hasn't it, recently?
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see that people, you know, they like their ham sandwiches, you know, the way they like their ham sandwiches, with just a little bit of mustard and a little bit of ketchup. You know, they don't want a reinvention of the true crime genre in a hurry. But that was part of our brief. So, you know, you could say that the reaction was expected. Although it's not nice to receive at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday evening in November, is it, Adam?
No, and the truth is, for us, like, we're protected in that it's not our story. We're telling someone else's story and we're making it, but it's a sort of slight to our artistic endeavour or our journalistic endeavour. You can see then for contributors that is difficult, those things. Luckily on this, it was us that took all the brunt of it. Like, I've had other times where people might sort of take against the contributor and sort of say things online. This was much more like, oh, I think the experimental nature of this is the polite way of saying the experimental nature of this is a waste of time. Like that, you know, like, but in the end, a few people shout a few negative things, we see that, then a lot more million people are quiet and watch it and enjoy it, right? So that's sort of fine.
And that does become part of the sort of the duty of care, in the sense that I'd be reading all the articles, and there's such a lot of complimentary articles that would come in for Victoria, a huge amount, and also for Maddie, the female police officer, and I would pass those on, you know, and I'd be having a really quite intense dialogue with the interviewees in the week after the program, and then obviously as time goes on, they, you know, they move on to different things, and you move on to different things. I think it's 3 days, people say, is the time that, you know, they get spotted in the street, and then after 3 days, people have, you know, they're yesterday's chip wrapper. But no, the duty of care is a huge part of it. You know, it's fundamental to what we do. There was an interesting moment I meant to say earlier where, when Maddie was on the film set, she said that she kept forgetting that the actor Neil Bishop was the actor Neil Bishop, and there was times where she was thinking that she was in the room again with Emil, the perpetrator who's obviously now in prison somewhere in the UK. So with that alone, we felt sort of was testimony to the fact that we were doing something interesting. You know, that she was forgetting that he was an actor.
That's terrifying. Yeah. Well, I could honestly tell you that it dominated the sort of the office conversation with people. I had a vested interest in it. To be completely transparent, I know Adam, and I'm a big fan of his work, and I was watching it come out, and I was, you know, wanted to hear what people said, but unprompted, people were talking about it the next day in my office, which I think is a positively as well. It really hooks people in. So I think that was good, and the Daily Mail loved it. So I mean, that's it, right? Can't get any better than that.
I think the Daily Mail said something like, "Let's not beat around the bush. This is one of the most engrossing documentaries I've ever seen." Something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember what they said.
Really? Well, Adam, show us your tattoo.
I heard about a group of women in Belfast. I think there's a sort of a University of the Third Age type of tea party that happens in East Belfast on I think it's a daily basis. And my friend, she reported back to me that she would find little groups of women having lunch together on the week of this documentary, and they were discussing in great sort of earnest who was right and who was wrong, and why did she say this and why did she say that, again, they were talking about it as if the drama wasn't drama. From their point of view, it didn't matter that Emil was an actor. They were talking about him as if that was the real Emil. Uh, 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 and I suppose when I hear anecdotes like that, I think, oh, this program's serving a purpose of some sort. It's getting that theme of coercive control out there, talked about in the tea houses of East Belfast, and that can only be a good thing.
Absolutely.
One of the sorry to interrupt, Jonathan. Just one thing I'll just say quickly is one of the things about Guy's approach to the drama is like slightly like the confidence of coming in knowing exactly what we wanted to do is like that confidence of being able to break the rules. We went to a place where basically a drama studio where they are very accomplished and used to shooting drama, but that isn't often saying, okay, this actor is going to embody this real person. It's normally a drama that's been written. I think Guy's approach on it, like, do you remember, Guy, when you would refer to, like, and the actors were great actors, led by Mianna Buring, who's a brilliant actor to have in a sort of documentary series. It's quite unusual for someone like for her to do something like this. And she just became Victoria, right? And then so like Neil just became Emil. And that's how we sort of saw them. And they only ever spoke their real words. So there was never, like, and they learnt that verbatim, and that's there was always someone checking that. They only ever spoke their real words. But Guy would say to the actor, instead of saying, right, Neil, this is what you need to do now, he'd always say, right, Emil, this is what you're doing next, to sort of help embody that. But when you've got a whole team around you of like, that are not our regular team, that are the drama team, not what we normally do, they just can't get their heads around that. So they would correct you. Do you remember that, Guy? They would be like, oh, you mustn't call him his character name, you must call him his real name, else the actor will be upset. And then there would be like the lighting people just had no idea what we were doing when we would go in and say, no, that lighting's all too real, we need it to be very unreal. And the set designers were sort of not that engaged with what we were trying to do in the first couple of days. And I remember, like, we shot for sort of 6 or 7 days of drama. And then I remember a moment sort of a couple of days into that shoot where everyone suddenly got it and it all just clicked in, and like a load of crew that just are used to working on very different projects suddenly were like, oh, this is quite exciting actually to do it completely differently. And the lighting guy, who I feel like in the first day or two, he and I weren't on the same page and we were sort of clashing about ideas. By the end of it, he was offering so many new ideas and totally into it. And on the final day, I noticed he brought his family down to come and look what we were doing, right? That's a job which is like a regular job for him. And that a lot of that comes from like but also Guy's approach of just saying, we're just going to do this differently, right? We're just going to approach this in our way. And Guy, I remember saying to Guy, they keep telling me that you're not allowed to call the actors by their character names. And Guy just said to me, don't worry about it. I'm just doing it,
I discovered at the end of the shoot that the younger, there must have been 30 crew there, and all in all, including everyone. And the younger members of the crew had a WhatsApp group where they were sending memes of things that were being said, because they could tell that this wasn't an accomplished, experienced drama crew, director and producer at work, but they were loving the experience because it was done in the right spirit and it was done for fun and entertainment. And so at the end of the shoot, they were showing me all the memes that they'd been sending, to each other while we'd been working, and mostly taking the piss out of me. But I was proud of that. And well, I had one tip that came across my mind where, I mean, there's no way you can do these things as a director on your own. And I think that the best thing is a director can know is that, okay, I'm only going to get things right 60-70% of the time. So I need people around me who are going to fill in the other 30%. And I'll give you an example. I was doing this thing where I was filming and I was interacting with the actors, and I was asking them about the process and why we were doing what we were doing, and basically getting too wrapped up in giving the actors a job that they weren't there to do. They weren't there to analyze what we were doing. And Adam sort of pointed out at one, he tapped me on the shoulder and he says, it's really good when you're talking about, what we know from the police and telling the actors what they need to know to do their job. It's not working so well when you're asking the actors to do a different job. And so immediately it was so useful to me. I just stopped doing all that stuff and focused my attention on doing this stuff. So it wasn't about clipping my wings. It was just about saying, this is working, keep doing this. And I think that's a valuable lesson for all directors, is that work out what's going wrong with the help of, the clever people around you, and don't try and do it all yourself.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, Guy. And also, from my point of view, in the sort of risk-taking of this, like, the producer is not normally the risk-taking person, right? The producer is the person that wants to make sure we make this, deliver it, it's made for the money we've got, etc. There was a moment which has become a very talked about moment, which is sort of towards the end of the first episode, where Guy takes a very unusual approach in briefing the actor by basically Guy suddenly embodies the police officer and briefs the actor about the actor Miana, who's playing Victoria, about this is what she would have been told and this is how I want you to react, and it basically leads to a guttural scream, which is what actually happened. And then Guy shot that in one take, with no alternative of how we would tell that part of the story. And that, for me, like, as a producer, I was thinking, oh my, like, if this doesn't work, that's a massive chunk of story that we have no other way of telling. But it works brilliantly. And I think probably for the same thing, like, we have a balance, didn't we, where there's like, yeah, okay, there's things which I can sort of help you with, but then there's times where I just need to go, oh no, if we want this to be creative, we have to let you create. And that was a great moment, which I was quite nervous about while we were doing, but in the program has worked really well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think it's that old filmmaking lesson that people talk about. It's only out of a sort of a confinement do you come up with good ideas. And I worked out that we would need a lot of extras to tell that scene, or more than would make it good. And it was like, okay, well, why don't we have no extras and just simplify it? So sometimes those solutions always come out of what's the word? A confined situation creates a good idea, doesn't it? So if that's another lesson I picked up, is that if you're facing a problem, then the response is not to over worry about it, but to say, well, what is the bright idea that this problem's going to force us to have that will make it even better? Yeah.
No, I think it's all super valuable. I can't help but feel empathy for those people who are getting a bit nervous around you when it turns out the person playing a murderer decides they're going to go all methody, Yeah. But maybe thoughts for next time. But I'm mindful that we're about to run out of time, and the people in the room that we're speaking to are looking at you as being ultra established, as being something way off in the distance that they hope to get to be, but they're taking baby steps. And they're desperate to know how to get into the industry and how to think about this moment in this sort of creative industry. So I was wondering, I know you have both had very different routes in, and you just said something about confidence, Adam, which I think sort of speaks to perhaps, I don't know, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I know that, Guy, your way into the industry was quite uncompromising. Whereas Adam, you took a more conventional route from speaking of someone who came in as an assistant in a studio to work his way up to being a photographer. So can you just describe how you both got into the industry and just tell us that story? Yeah, briefly.
Mine's the boring version. Do you want to go first, Guy?
No, go ahead. I don't know your story.
Oh, well, it is quite boring. I basically, after university, I've sort of, which is 2001, I was expecting to go into journalism. I studied economics and politics and thought I would go into journalism. And I was sort of quite shocked to discover at that time how low the pay was in sort of regional newspapers. And that was in Birmingham. And then I ended up getting some work experience at the BBC at Pebble Mill. And I think I got a 2-week work experience, so unpaid job, working on a gardening show and then a makeover show. And just that 2 weeks turned into, actually, can you... I then got a runner's job for like 3 months, and then that 3 months starts to turn into, actually, can you stay for another 6 months? And to be honest, my entire career has essentially been, can you stay for another few months? Which just eventually adds up to 20 odd years. And that is just like progressing through. So I went from runner to trainee researcher, which at the time was at the BBC. So then I went through the scheme at the BBC where you have trainee researchers, which you have to, it was quite a competitive scheme. But then you then go trainee researcher, assistant producer, director, and then eventually now executive producer, which is what I do now. So they are just sort of gradual steps on the television sort of ladder. Most of which is just time spent and progress, right? That through your career until you get to a point where that whatever works for you. And for me personally, I loved being a director and really enjoyed that part. But being a producer now, an exec producer, gives me a sort of bit more work-life balance, because I think, Guy, you might say that when you are directing things, it's very consuming, isn't it? I think in a producer it's slightly different. I can kind of do this each day, almost Monday to Friday type thing, and have around like having younger children and things like that. So that was my route in. I should say like one of the things I was told, because I've now been at Story Films for about 6 years, and I was mentored by Claire Sillery, who's the head of documentaries at the BBC 7 or 8 years ago. And I was sort of at a point there where I'd done Valley Cops, which you mentioned, which had done really well for me. And I wasn't really sure what to do next. And her advice was essentially, don't worry about what you make, just worry about who you work with. And so then that's where it came as an opportunity to work at Story Films. The two guys that run that, Dave Nath and Pete Beard, are two of the best filmmakers in the industry. And they are a filmmaker-led company. And me for sort of feeling like a filmmaker that was ready to be a producer for a while at least, it was proven to be a really good decision for me. It's basically, I would say, anyone that's looking to get into this industry, it's about who you're going to work with as opposed to what the job is. So if you see something like advertised, but you're not that interested in the subject, but it's a company where the people that work there and run it you respect, that's probably better for you than working on something where the subject seems really interesting, but the output of that company might not be your sensibility. And so that's been the thing that's driven me for the last 5 or 6 years, is sort of, we'll see what the projects are, but I know like the team I'm surrounded with we'll have a good time doing it. It will be sort of made well and respectfully, and we'll sort of put effort into making it. So it's about the people that you're with.
Yeah, I would definitely corroborate a couple of those things that Adam's saying, in the sense that it's hugely important who you're working with, and it doesn't matter really what the job is you're doing. It doesn't matter if you're a producer or an assistant producer or a researcher or just making tea, but just being in the sort of, you know, the company of people who are helping you understand what the best film can be, just runs really deep. My first experience of television came via a scheme as well. And I don't know how many of these schemes still exist around the country, but you know, there will be some of them, and it's always worth working out what those schemes are. I was about 29 years of age, and I had been working for a magazine, doing magazine journalism, writing, you know, high profile articles such as The Future of the Flush, and, you know, the history of the Costa del Sol, and, you know, it was in trade publications that were hugely enjoyable and great people to work with. But I had also been doing a master's in history in the evenings, because just I wanted to keep my head busy. And I went to watch a documentary on the London Film Festival, and I sat there, and it was a post-traumatic stress disorder documentary about the American Army, and it had a soundtrack by Mos Def. I don't know if that's how you pronounce Mos Def. And I was just taken by the fact that you could use this subject matter, because I was studying post-traumatic stress, but you could put a hip hop track to it, and it did all sorts of things to the brain. And I thought, I'm nobody's going to read my history essays, but there's a chance that I could be good at documentary making. And I literally went home and typed documentary making into Google, and up came this BBC scheme that was being advertised at the Sheffield Documentary Festival. So it was literally a case of, what are the schemes? How on earth do I get in? And there was a scheme, and you had to submit ideas, and you go through the process. But that And that led to a sort of an event where you had to pitch your ideas against someone else, and it was a bit Dragon's Den. But the lucky break was that that scheme was a cracker, and it involved sort of working with people like Fergus O'Brien, Nick Mursky, Mark Isaacs. And in turn, you know, Mark Isaacs took me under his wing. In turn, he'd been under Pavel Pavlovsky's wing years ago. And it's that sort of, the closer you can get to those real beautiful filmmakers, the better, you know, even if it is tying their shoelaces and whatever it is, you know. So I would corroborate with Adam there, but I did benefit from that scheme. And I just hope those schemes are still out there, and, you know, those funding mechanisms. And the other one was that the BFI were offering £1,000 grants for short films, and I discovered that my friend's uncle was going to see his kids at a music festival, and he only saw them once a year, but he would take them to a music festival, and they would basically break into the music festival and sort of sell things. And, you know, so the film was called A Short Film About Freedom, and we had a £1,000 grant to make it. But the £1,000 didn't matter. It was just having the focus to have to deliver a film. And that's the other thing, that over the years I've made lots of short films in my spare time, maybe get a couple of £1,000 from the local council, or maybe don't have any funding at all. But if you're always, even if you're doing a job that isn't quite right, there's no harm in making a little film at the weekends. I can't say that strongly enough, that films are there to be made, especially these days, you know, with the technology. And don't let anyone sort of tell you that you can't go out and make a film on a Saturday and do it. And the feeling you'll get by the end of that day will stick with you, and you'll know, this is for me. That felt good, you know.
And you, like, you'll end up finding yourself incredibly committed to that. I made a short film when I was working on a project which was my day-to-day job, like working in TV on a TV production, and it was okay what I was doing, but I wanted to make a short film, and so I was having to borrow the camera to do it on the weekends. And I went to film the contributor that I had found. It was only for a day, and it was only a particular day that I could film with them, but it happened to be the day that I was moving house. So I turned up at this contributor's house in a 7.5-ton van with every single thing I own in it, and parked outside and was like, just ignore that. We're just going to do our bit now. And then carried on and like filmed for 2 or 3 hours, then went and moved house. And so it's a bit of a bizarre thing to do, really, but like, obviously the bit that I remember from that is that sort of ridiculous scenario. But making a short film, like you say, Guy, if you're doing a project which just feels not your sensibility, you'll be learning something, but you're delivering someone else's vision, and you need like loads of people to do that, right? But then you get your own sensibility through like this little breakaway piece of freedom that you can just do what you want.
And maybe there is, if you can't find a scheme, or the local council's funds have dried up, maybe the local estate agent will pay 500 quid for a little short film that's filming with one of their happy house buyers, and you can take an angle on it. Like, there's something about finding some motivation to deliver something to someone, you know, because it is tricky to just head out and film willy-nilly. But if there's a motivation, whether it's delivering a film for someone's birthday, or, you know, I always find it really useful to get a small amount of money, even if it didn't pay for much, because it just gives you that focus. I have to deliver this to someone. But as I say, it's not easy to find these funding pots in the current climate, and I really don't have a whole lot of advice on that. Adam, I don't know if you've seen many of them, or Jonathan, have you seen many of these funding pots around? Like, what?
We keep trying to keep on top of them for all our subject areas at university. But as you rightly point out, they're few and far between. They're highly competitive. But I think that advice there about, I mean, that's a really lovely thought, that one might produce something for a local estate agent that one could take an angle on and get a little bit of something out. Because I empathize as being a photographer as well. I mean, there's always a way to take an angle on something and to do a bit of your work on the side. And I think this is really great advice. And I think it's been wonderful. You've been so generous taking us through through the whole arc of pitching a story, of taking on a story, of taking on the responsibility of the duty of care for those people, seeing them all the way through, and then, living the highs and lows of it afterwards with them, and sharing your sort of journey in as well. I mean, I can't thank you enough. The one thing, I'm mindful that we've gone over time now, and so I don't want to abuse you both, because I'd love to ask you again in some point in the future if I can catch up with you. So, but you mentioned about getting close to beautiful filmmakers, quote, Guy. And so how do our students follow your beautiful self? What's the best place to find you?
Oh, goodness me. Oh,
yeah. Would they find you on LinkedIn? Would they follow you on X? Or do you have a column in the Daily Mail they can subscribe to?
I have my sister helped me make a website last year. So that's probably the bit, because I try and put things up there when they come. And that's guykingfilms.com. And there's an email address there. I'm always happy to hear from, younger filmmakers who are coming through, and I like watching stuff that they send me and trying to help where I can. So my email address is on that website.
I'll find that and I'll link to it, Guy. And that's incredibly generous of you again. So thank you. I'm sorry to have trapped you into that corner. Adam's had a moment to think about it. He can give us a false address now. So how do people follow you?
Well, what I would say, you can easily find me on LinkedIn or something. I would just say you sort of have to be quite persistent. So not to be too negative about this, but the industry is in a pretty challenging time at the moment. Like over the last year or two, the amount of funding for programs from almost all broadcasters and streamers has been quite significantly reduced. So even hugely experienced people are finding it quite difficult at the moment, and there's essentially like a freelancer crisis. That is not to say that there are no opportunities, right? There are opportunities, and you can sort of persevere, but it's not for the faint-hearted right now. It's sort of and like slightly unfairly, it's also not for people that have to work every single week of the year. And so whilst Guy and I have probably got ourselves into a position of getting a decent reputation and getting sort of like various chances to work, we're still like most of our colleagues in a position where we don't really know how much work we've got after this year or sort of into the future. So it's not a career in which you can plan. I'm sure most people know that getting into it. And at the moment, you sort of probably have to plan to be working like probably 75% of the time if things are going well, so by all means people can get in touch with us directly. We don't make loads of junior hires, but sometimes if people are sort of very keen on sort of coming and like seeing what it's like on a shoot or kind of doing some work with us for like ad hoc, or like are willing to do like we had quite a new researcher, didn't we, Guy? Katie Brown, who worked on the full series with us, and she sort of was able to just do a bit of everything, and including like transcribing. Like we now like AI will do all your transcripts, but it gets it wrong, and so like even just going through and correcting all of those for us and being really helpful in that, like that's a paid job. So we will make sure, like for our point of view is not to take people on for nothing. We don't really do work experience very much. We'll maybe do that for a week or something occasionally. Generally we'll look to have fewer people coming in, but it will be in paid gigs. But yeah, it's a really great industry to work in, from like the various experiences you'll get. And I've been to places that I would never have gone to otherwise, and I've sort of been in worlds within the UK and further that I would never have been invited into in any other circumstance. And you get sort of quite high highs, but you get low lows in this industry as well. So it's like the thing that we've just talked about. I would say I've been working for like 24 years now in the same industry, in the same thing, and I would say the number of projects that I could talk about in the positive way that we've just talked about the Fool, about how everything lined up and we're really proud of, is not that many. That's not to say the others were like hugely problematic, but they might have just been a bit more run of the mill, right? And so like it's only occasionally that it all really lines up and you're like, oh yes, I'm really proud of that, that's done really well, I've enjoyed doing it, everything worked out in it. Sometimes it doesn't quite go like that. Sometimes it's really draining to work on projects where you feel like it's maybe going in the opposite direction. So it's not it's like we've talked. It's been really fun basking in the success of a successful series, right? But like the reality is, you have to be quite resilient to work in this industry, I would say. But I do agree totally with what Guy said. Like, if you find the right homes and you find the right people, it is not just a like cynical industry where people are chances and don't care about other people's feelings. It's not like that. That we like when I've worked with Guy and at Story and the few of us that work together quite a lot, it's a really supportive atmosphere.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for making the time. There's loads in there, and we'll follow you. And over the next few weeks, I'll share this interview with the class, and you may hear from us, and I'm sure you'll get some films through the post, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks again, both.
No problem. Good speaking to you, Jonathan. Take it easy.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.